So welcome everyone to the Rask Halifax Center September members meeting. I'm Judy Black, the president of the center. And we hope we have an agenda that suits everyone's needs and desires. And we try and make sure that various topics are covered so that interest members with various interests. Our panelists today are Dave Chapman in alphabetical order. Wayne Harasimovich, Paul Heath, Dave Hoskin, Peter Hurley, and Pat Kelly. And for those who have joined this webinar, time will be allotted at the end of each presentation for you to ask questions, or you can put your mouse down at the bottom and click on the chat or the Q&A, and we can answer your questions that way. If you have a question during the presentation that you don't want to forget to ask, that would be the method to use. And as per usual, in our usual face-to-face meetings, we've always had a social time in which Pat provided snacks and beverages, but obviously that's not possible this time. So Pat won't be delivering snacks this evening, will you? Or this afternoon, will you, Pat?
No, if you want tea, you're going to have to come here for it.
And for guests attending this session who are currently not members of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, or RASC, we strongly encourage you to do so. There are several benefits for joining RASC, such as your very own copy of the Observer's Handbook. This is the current one. Every member gets one as part of their membership. They also get subscription to Sky News, the magazine of the center, also the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society, which is the science edition of one of our productions. You also have access to all the RASC presentations that they have on their Zoom sessions, some that are for members only, and certainly the observing programs, such as the Explore the Universe, that anyone can take, and others that only members can. So, such as the Explore the Moon, the Isabel Williamson Lunar Observing Program, Deep Sky Gems, all sorts of neat, wonderful observing programs. And of course, when you join the RASC, make sure that you make yourself affiliated with Halifax Center. That would be us as access, because that will then give you access to our Nova Notes, our magazine, also to our meetings and all special presentations that we have, not to mention our library when it becomes available to us again when St. Mary's University opens up. But more importantly, our St. Croix Observatory, which members can still access. And the most important feature of all of this, whether it's national or here locally in Halifax Center, is you have access to an incredible cadre of amateur and professional astronomers that are more than willing to assist you as you begin your journey exploring the night skies. So we'll talk a little bit more later as to how you can join. Next thing I want to mention is happy birthday to everybody who has a birthday today or the coming month. Congratulations on another successful circumnavigation of the sun. On to our agenda. First thing, we have Paul Heath on the Food for the Soul. Paul is a longtime member. He's a past president. He's currently sits as a director on our board and is our outreach chair. He also sits nationally on the Inclusivity and Diverse I&D committee. I can never really get those words straight. Sorry, Paul. And he's also an author of his own book of poems called Food for the Soul. And on that note, I will hand it over to you, Paul, to read your poem, and I will post it on the chat for people to follow along.
This was sort of, I don't know, because of the September 1st was the clearest night I've seen in a long, long time. And we were out observing pretty well to almost 4 o'clock when the moon and Mars came up, basically. So we were up all night long, and it sort of inspired this poem. So if you've ever gone outside just at dusk and watched the stars come out, you'll get an idea of what's in the poem.
For some reason, sorry to interrupt, Paul, for some reason the poem is not allowing me to copy it. So what I will do is I will share my screen and I will show it instead, and you can read. Okay, and then I'll
Okay,
take it
yeah.
off.
All right. Powder puff. The canvas lay wide, unmarked, with pale blue motion unseen. Then with subtle and delicate touches, a thin brush, brightening points upon the unmarred piece did lay. With wide and oh so subtle strokes, across the pale blue canvas wide, in quiet silence, darkening rose up the canvas wide. Again, with thin brush, upon the unmarred piece did touch. Many brightening points now scattered lay, as if intended these clustered brightening points like patterns upon the canvas made. With wide and oh so subtle strokes, upon the darkened pale blue canvas wide, sharp blackness and silence crept up the canvas wide. Then upon each brightening point, the thin brush with rapid twists a sparkle placed. As spread, clenched in hand, 100 thin brushes danced the canvas wide. Down the palette, the wide brush splayed, with a stiff arm flick, an arc across the canvas laid. As with a wide and oh so subtle stroke, the last faint brightness from the canvas was swept away. Then the final touch to the canvas subtly was made. With the tenderest and delicate of touches, the shiny points, the arc within, a powder puff allayed. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Another beautiful poem for us to enjoy. I thank you very much for that.
But that was inspired by that being out right at sunset and watching the stars come out in such a crystal sharp, clear night. Not a cloud in the sky. It was just beautiful.
Wonderful. And speaking of up in the sky, our next portion of the program is What's Up? And that's with Dave Chapman, our center's observing chair and member extraordinaire. He's been a member for too many years to count, as well as served both nationally on the national committees, as well as here in various roles. And so welcome, Dave, and we look forward to What's Up.
Thank you, thank you. Did you just say that I've been a member for too many years?
I said so many, I thought.
Oh, okay.
Too many years to count, maybe?
Oh, okay. Okay, first a word from our sponsor. I was trying to get your attention. If you join, the Society is now sending copies of the Explore the Universe guide to every new member as well. Plus, if you're already a member and you don't have one, you can ask for one. You just have to contact Adela at mempub@ask.ca if you don't have one and you want one. They're basically giving them to all members, okay? Further to that, this is a new product from RASC, which is the Explore the Universe workbook, which has the Explore the Universe program in it and a little bit of instructions and then a bunch of log pages. It comes in this nice softcover bound workbook. This actually was generated by the Halifax Center, and well, not this version, but originally we made it in the Halifax Center, and we were giving them away with less fancy covers at Nova East for door prizes. I think we did it for 3 years at least, and we proposed this to the RAC as a product, and they came out with it this year. They've got a nice, there's a nice cover picture by Alan Dyer. The other thing is you can actually download this free online and print it yourself, or print it at Staples or what have you. Or you can get this for $10 from the office. Okay. So what's up? Mars is up. I'm going to share my screen. What is up this week? This month. This has been on our website since the 1st of September. So every month I do one, and I post it on the 1st of September, and then I present it at the meeting. So if the meeting, like this month is a bit late, you can always go to the Halifax Center website and see the presentation. So I always start with the sun. The sun this month. So we have an autumnal equinox this month on the September 22nd. So we go from a situation where we have more day than night to a situation where we have more night than day, if you include the dusk and dawn with night. So, sunset is getting earlier, sunrise is getting later. I don't know if people have noticed that. It's changing very quickly at the end of the summer. We're getting more darkness, yay, for people who like to observe. We're getting less sunlight, boo, for people who garden like me. Basically, when the hours of sunlight get below 10, nothing much grows in the garden. And the altitude of the sun is going down too. So it's the end of that season. I have these nifty little diagrams here. If you want to see an animated movie of that, I won't do it now, but if you go to the website and see the presentation there, that link is active and you can see the movie I made. The other link up here is today's solar activity, which is just a hot link to all kinds of views of the sun in different wavelengths. I'm not going to do that. That's something you can do for homework. The moon this month. It's a very busy month with the moon. We had the full berry ripening moon last week, and then we had a nice conjunction of moon and Mars last Saturday night. I was at an event up the Eastern Shore, and like a good druid, I predicted that the past full moon would rise at 9:30 with Mars right next to it, and it did, and everybody went, ooh, ah, how did you do that? There was, if you were paying attention before, there was a nice opportunity to find Uranus by looking at the moon. That'll come up again in October, I think. On the 14th, which is like a couple of days from now, in the morning, mind you, the waning crescent moon and Venus will have a nice pairing. So that's, if you like taking night sky pictures, that's a good one. On the 17th, we have the new moon, and it's very close to a perigee. So that means there will be large tides after that new moon. So anyone that lives near the ocean will notice large tides. Now that is the mate calling moon for the Mi'kmaq, and that's called Wigum Gewigus. And I'm going to try to play a video of, yeah, I guess, no, I'm not going to do that because I just lost it. So, yeah, I'm still very challenged by Zoom and trying to share things. Anyway, there's a link there that will take you to a little, really short video, like 30 seconds long, of Curtis Michael saying Wigum Gewigus and teaching you how to pronounce it. He's so good that he taught me. Coming up on, after the new moon comes, the first quarter will arrive on the 23rd. And then there's a sequence of days where the moon is close to Jupiter and Saturn. And on the 29th, I recommend you do this if it's clear. Find the moon on September 29th, and Neptune will be in a binocular field if you want to find Neptune in your binoculars. The full moon after that is the 1st of October. That is called, again, that's the mate calling full moon on the 1st of October. I don't want to get into next month really. However, there are 2 full moons in October, and the second one is on Halloween. So that's kind of cool. But I'll tell you more about that next month. So I always encourage people to do the Explore the Universe program. And this is the moon chart from Explore the Universe. It's got 12 craters and 12 mare. All of these can be found in binoculars and some with your naked eye. So I would encourage you to look up that program and to start observing these very easy to find objects and get going observing. So the challenge is to try to find three of these in your binoculars. Now the planets are quite busy. The only planet that's not easy to see, it's actually at a greatest elongation coming up on October the 1st, but it's not a very nice one for the Northern Hemisphere. It's very low, it's gonna be very difficult. I mean, you could technically find it, and if you do, great, but it's gonna be tough. Venus is high in the morning sky. Anybody who gets up a little bit early will see it. And it's actually embedded in the zodiacal light after the moon disappears coming up, which will be an interesting view if you're in a dark sky location to see zodiacal light. But it's one of those few cases where Venus itself creates light pollution, because it's sometimes hard to see the zodiacal light when Venus is embedded in it. On October 3rd, it's very near Regulus. So the challenge is get up in the morning in late September and try to find a dark place and see if you can observe zodiacal light. Mars, wow, here comes Mars. Pat Kelly's going to be talking about Mars, so I won't go on too long, but it's getting super bright. It's going to be minus 2.3 this month, almost as bright as Jupiter. The disk size is growing. It'll go to a maximum of 23 seconds of arc this month. And the closest approach is coming up in early October. This is the month that you should start observing Mars. Now, you do have to wait up a little bit late, but it's worth it. Jupiter and Saturn are still in the southern sky. They transit in twilight hours. So as soon as it gets dark, you can go out, still see Jupiter. I looked at it last night, it looked great. There's a double shadow transit coming up on September 14th. Unfortunately, it's at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm not even sure if Jupiter's still in the sky at that time. I didn't check that, but again, it's close to the moon, September 24th and 25th. And those two planets are going to be in a close conjunction on December 21st. So mark that on your observer's calendar. Neptune is going to be at opposition this September with a maximum brightness of 7.8. Can't quite make it out with your eye, but in a telescope, it's quite easy. You should be able to pick it up in binoculars if you just want to find it. And Uranus is in opposition coming up in October 31st. Here comes Mars. So I put together this slide just to show you how big Mars is relative to Jupiter and Saturn. If you've been looking at those planets on the left-hand side, you can see Jupiter and Saturn. And this is what Mars is going to be doing. It's already past September 1st. In a couple of days, it's going to be 21 seconds of arc. So actually bigger than the disk of Saturn, but not as big as the rings. But that's how big it is. And then when it gets to closest approach, it's bigger yet. So the thing to do is to go to the Observer's Handbook and read page 217 on how to observe. And I hope that Pat will tell you a little bit more about that later, how to observe. I've got a few tips too, but I don't want to steal his thunder. So this is the one we missed, Mars and the moon together. I don't know, maybe people saw it. I saw it, it was cool. And on the following day, this is a binocular view. If you could find the moon, you can find Uranus. So I'll be making those kinds of opportunities known in future episodes of What's Up. And here's Thursday and Friday, late in September. Moon passes Jupiter and Saturn. That's in, I guess, Sagittarius. This is the one I was mentioning on the 29th of September, Tuesday. This is how you can find Neptune with binoculars. Find the moon and then stick it in the lower right, and Neptune will be in the upper left. And well, on the 2nd of October, Moon and Mars will be in the binocular field. It won't be hard to find Mars. It's going to be about the brightest thing in the sky. But I'd like people to try to find Neptune. I think that would be a fun challenge for people to do. And you can do that in the city. You know, you can even do it from your condo or whatever if you're pointing basically south. So, you know, a lot of people say it's fall. I would agree with you meteorologically, but astronomically, I'm still showing the summer constellations, because the summer constellations hang around for a long time because it gets dark earlier in the evening. So even though the constellations move on every night by the same amount. When it gets dark earlier and earlier, it's like when you go out after dark, they're still there. So, you know, you can still see Cygnus, Sagittarius, not so much Scorpius, Capricornus, Aquila, Hercules, Lyra. Those are the summer constellations and Explore the Universe. They're easy pickings, even from the city. And then stars, summer stars are still there. The so-called summer triangle, Deneb, Altair, Vega, hangs around for a very long time in the fall. It's way up in the sky at dusk, easy to pick out. And if you have trouble remembering the names of the stars, just remember Dave, Deneb, Altair, Vega. Vega gets 2 letters because it's got the double double in Lyra. So Dave, to remember the names of the stars. Alberio is a very interesting star. It's a colored double star, very nice in a telescope, easy to split. The other stars in Explore the Universe, Roswell, Gethe, a couple of stars in Capricornus, Nunci in the Sagittarius, and Antares. Antares might be a bit of a struggle. You might have to catch that right after dark. And many of those are amongst the brightest stars in the sky. Vega, Altair, Antares, and Deneb. As far as deep sky objects, there's 2 groups. There's the ones that aren't in Sagittarius, and then there's these ones. All of these are visible now. The Hercules cluster, M13. I also know it as Halley's cluster because Edmund Halley, he or Halley, I don't know how he said his name, Halley or Halley, it was named after him for some reason for a while. But I have a friend named Halley, so I think of it as Halley's cluster. The coat hanger is always a nice little object, binocular object, and that's the challenge. Look for that. It's very near the bottom of the Northern Cross, Cygnus, between Alberio and Altair. That's a good one to look for. The Wild Duck cluster in Scutum and the Eagle Nebula. Messier 4, that could be a bit of a challenge this time of year. Then there's the ones all in Sagittarius, which are just above the teapot. There's a number there. You can still catch them. Like I say, go out as soon as it gets dark. You have to find a place with a good southern horizon to catch those. So look for the Lagoon Nebula. Look for the binoculars. I think you can see the nebulosity in that object. Double stars, summer double stars. There's the famous double-double in Lyra, although in binoculars you just see that it's double. You would need a telescope to see that each pair of the double is also double. But there's also a couple of other stars in Lyra. Alberio I just mentioned. I think you can pick out the 2 stars in binoculars if you hold them steady. Omicron Cygni is a nice little triple star system. It's a favorite of mine and Judy. Ask her to tell you the story sometime. And Capricornus has a couple of neat double stars. I actually dispute that Capricornus is a summer constellation, but what the heck? That's the way it is, so that's the way it's going to stay. Now, after I do this, Judy, I'm going to take questions, but there's one other thing I want to do just before I leave off. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing if there's any questions.
Nothing yet.
Okay, I must have wowed them. They're all blown away.
Well, you give us everything we need to know, Dave.
Well, for those people who are getting bored with the summer stuff, next month it's going to be fall. So, I mean, the fall stuff. So it'll be different. Okay, I have one more thing to do. It's a word from our sponsor, so to speak. And I hope this is legit. You know that Halifax Center was instrumental in making Kejimkujik National Park and National Historic Site a dark sky preserve. And we've had a lot of dealings with them. It's been 10 years 3 years ago, Boxing Rock Brewery brought out this lovely little brew called Dark as Kedgie. That was 3 years ago they brought that out, and that was out for a while. And a few cents from each case, I think like a quarter, 25 cents, went to the Friends of Kedgie Cooperative Society to support dark sky programs at Kedgie. So we supported that. And I don't have the case with me, but we put the Dark Sky Preserve logo on the box. So we sort of gave it the endorsement. It got suspended for a while, but just recently they started a limited production up until December. They're going to do a limited run of Darkest Kedgie. And so if you were interested in that, go and look for it in the liquor store. And every box has a collectible constellation card, mostly designed by me, although I didn't do the graphics, but I suggested the constellations and everything. And on the back, there's a nice little write-up about why it's important. Collect them all 6 of them, 1 per case. So there's a lot of beer drinking in your future. I think they're pretty random. Apparently, if you collect them all, there's some kind of there's a supposedly fabulous prize. You have to post a photo of your cards on Instagram and such, and you can get a prize. I don't know what it is. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thanks, Dave. So while we're waiting for the stars to come out, we can sit there with a case of beer.
Whatever.
Suggested.
I still have a bottle of this that we took down to Nebraska and brought back, and I keep on telling people, this isn't the one. I've got it locked up in my safety deposit in the bank. But the one that's locked up, I say, it stood in the shadow of the moon, right? So it's a collectible bottle. So contact me offline if anyone's interested in acquiring that, and don't lowball me on the offers, okay?
Okay, thanks so much, Dave. Next, I guess I'm up with news from the board. I'll just share my screen here so that you can see it. Everyone can see that okay? All right. It's always been our custom, at least while I've been around, to provide information about our board of directors and news from the National RASC office. Given the times we live in nowadays with COVID, how we deliver programs and engage our members has changed. We hope the sessions offered to you via Zoom meet your needs. And if there's something in particular that you would like us to address at a future meeting, please contact me. My email address is there on the screen. And since we met last June, I'm certain you can appreciate that our center certainly has been a buzz. We have been involved with Zoom to conduct most of our businesses. You can see here we have members meetings, board of directors, our committee meetings, as well as our Nova East speaker series, for which there have been 5 presentations. And I'd like to thank our presenters that are posted right now, and we'll get to that in a moment. There is a 6th in our series, and it's being presented tonight. I keep saying tonight, this afternoon with Pat Kelly talking about Mars. That's the 6th in the series. And there's lots more on the site for you to enjoy. We do have our own YouTube channel, RASC Halifax. For those of you that attended the GA in 2015 and would like to relive some of the sessions, there are 10 sessions that are now posted on our site. And this is thanks to funding from the Special Projects Fund at National, as well as the work of Dave Chapman and Hallie Davies, a videographer here locally. So thank you for that. There are 10 of them. Also note that the Nova East, the COVID-19 edition speaker presentation is there. There are 5 there. The 6th one will be posted sometime within the next 24 to 48 hours. So look forward to that. There are lots of other things there as well, but I won't get into it. I'll let you go exploring. As part of Nova East and as a project of the Halifax Center, we have an astro imaging contest. It's for Nova Scotia residents and Halifax Centre members only, so apologies to those of you from away. The date for submission has been extended to midnight September 18. You can go to our novaeast.rask.ca website and get the particulars for the criteria for the three categories of solar system, deep sky, prime focus, and wide field. You can see the winners and their photographs there. And by the way, Jerry Black is not related except by marriage. The People's Choice is determined by the membership of Halifax Centre when they view all of the photos and they pick the one that they think is the best in their opinion. So please, there's only 6 days left until the contest submission ends. So get your astro editing done and submit your photos. Also, as part of Nova East, we have t-shirts designed thanks to John Reed. It does show the logo that we had planned for Nova East should it have happened as a camping event, which was March of the Planets. And you can see that all the planets except Mercury are on the same side of the sun. And that's the way that they would have been aligned on the weekend of August 21 to 23 when Nova East would have occurred. And obviously COVID hit us, and so it's now COVID canceled. If you would like to have a t-shirt with this on it, all you have to do is go to our website, the Nova East website, and it tells you exactly how to order your own. Get your own size, your own color. And next summer, hopefully, if we can go forward with Nova East in 2021, we can then look at the rainbow of colors of t-shirts on site from this year. One of the things we also like to do as part of Nova East is report on who in the past year from our center has received RASC observing certificates. And I know you've heard Dave talk about the Explore the Universe book, the second edition that is now out, as well as the workbook. But Dave himself recently this year did receive the ETU certificate. This is his third. He has also received the Messier Catalog in 1986 and the Isabel Williamson Lunar Observing Program in 2010. And Melody Hamilton, she received her Isabel Williamson Lunar Observing Program this year. We believe that she is probably the most decorated RASC member in the country because she's earned 6 out of the 7 RASC observing certificates. The only one missing from her wall is the Deep Sky Challenge, and I'm sure she's going to take that up over the coming year or two. To the business of the center, our nominating committee, it is part of our bylaw that stipulates we have to call for nominations before October 1st of each year. Given our next members meeting is not until October 3rd, the board is making a call for nominations today. So the question is, who's on the committee? Well, that is our conundrum, because right now we don't have a committee formed. Our policy does stipulate that we can have up to 3 Halifax Center members comprising this committee, with the president as ex officio. So we really would like some volunteers to step up to be on this committee. We really do need you. And if no one steps up, I guess I'll be making some phone calls to see if people would be willing to volunteer for this. So if you would like to volunteer for the nominating committee, please contact me. The board nominations, our center abides by the RASC policy regarding inclusivity and diversity and welcome every member in good standing who is not less than 19 years of age to stand for election or appointment as an officer or director of the center. And any eligible member of the center may be nominated as a director or officer at or before the AGM. So even if folks aren't on the slate that the nominating committee puts forward, they can still be nominated at the AGM itself. So if you're thinking about becoming part of the board or want to hold one of the appointed positions, please let us know, and we'll certainly make sure that your name gets put onto the slate. St. Croix Observatory. These are 2 photographs of our observatory, one obviously at a time when very easy to access, and the other perhaps not so much. Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often in this neck of the woods, but when it does hit us well. With COVID, in June, our board developed a document entitled Regarding Use of SCO During COVID-19. And in that document, it stipulates all the things that you need to consider if you are to go out to SCO for an evening. And the one in particular I want to bring to people's attention is the fact that it states no more than 10 people on site at SCO at any one time. As you can appreciate, this would certainly then have ramifications for events being held at SCO, such as our annual barbecue. So consequently, because of this stipulation and food security issues and whatnot, we've canceled the barbecue this year. But don't fret. The hope is that in 2021, everything will be back open again and we can have a huge celebration at the barbecue. Also, a thing to note is that coming up is our 25th anniversary for SCO. It opened up on noon of summer solstice on June 21st, 96, sorry. Anyway, it's 25 years coming up, and we're looking forward to planning for a special event for that particular date, although this is a Tuesday, I believe, in 2022, so we may be planning for a few days after that. But nonetheless, it's quite an accomplishment for us to say that we've had this phenomenal facility for that long. As you could appreciate, there are some things that we would like to see changed to the observatory. And so the board has met on September 3rd and had a special meeting on the 10th to discuss how we would go forward with discussing upgrades to the facility. So the plan is that this coming Wednesday, September 16, members will be sent an explanation of a 3-phase plan, and there'll be a SurveyMonkey poll to determine the support that you have for the proposal going forward. You have 1 week till midnight of September 23rd to send in your responses to SurveyMonkey, and they will be collated. And on September 24th, the board will meet to discuss the next steps. If there is support for this particular proposal, then a special members meeting on requisition will be held, and that members will be given information regarding that at a future date. So look forward to that, and look forward to an email from the center on September 16. National calendars. Our center will again sell calendars. We will have them here at the center for distribution. The method will be prepayment to our treasurer along with a provision of your mailing address. And Halifax Center members will be apprised of their availability from us via the announced list. So be aware of that as well. And I apologize not having the 2021 calendar cover, but I wasn't able to access it at this point. RASC has a committee, the Inclusivity and Diversity Committee, and their basic statement is that RASC believes in and practices inclusivity and diversity, and this holds true for our center as well and all others across the country. We are opposed to all forms of unlawful and unfair discrimination. All are welcomed regardless of age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, ethnic origin, color, nationality, national origin, religion or belief, or sex and sexual orientation. And that is something that we would follow. The Inclusivity and Diversity Committee is providing sensitivity training on various aspects of this. The first was held on August 22nd relating to gender, and I believe that it will soon be online and accessible to everyone. And other sessions are being planned in the upcoming year. So be advised and look forward to hearing them and perhaps participating. One of the things I like to do is to highlight some of the folk in our center stars, people who have been published elsewhere, outside of RASC as well as within. Hopefully by now, the vast majority of you have received the latest edition of Sky News, September-October edition. I really felt that this one should have had a subtitle added to Sky News, and it should have read Nova Scotia edition. And you're asking me why? Well, just look at the cover. Tim Doucette from Quinn, Nova Scotia provided the photo of Neowise on the cover. Added to that, the best of the best, Jason Dane received the Sky News Photo of the Year award. So congratulations, Jason, on a fabulous photo of Polly's Cove and the Milky Way shining beautifully above it. Then there's Barry Burgess, who contributed his photo of Neowise in the photo montage on page 8. There's John Reed in the article on Cosmos in the classroom relating to university programs and whatnot. John is there in the first and second photo. And some of you may recognize Tiffany Field in the first photo. She was our keynote speaker last year at Nova East. And then there's Dave Chapman, of course, in the Rask Spotlight, who gave his observations regarding the Venus occultation in June. So this is why it should have been the Nova Scotia edition. So congratulations, everyone, for being acknowledged and shown. I mentioned earlier all those perks for you to join the center, but I didn't tell you how. So now I am. How can you join? Well, it's really easy. When you join, you're actually joining Rask as a national entity. You can join online by going to our website. It shows there in the lower left, halifax.rask.ca. Go into the menu item called About Us. And if you click on Join, you can join online. And that will link you directly to the Rask Canada website. But if you're one of those dear souls that likes to do the paper copy and send a check, you can then click on Form and it'll direct you to the PDF that you can print off and mail with your payment. Either way will get you there. So we welcome you to join, encourage you to join if you aren't already a member. And I apologize, but for some reason my calendar did not show here, but it will with the next one. The Rask Halifax Center, our next meeting is again by Zoom. The usual suspects will be up for presenting. The mini presentation that is there is, we've discovered that the Observer's Handbook only has a limited number of topics that can be addressed without us having to address several pages of charts. So we did discuss several topics that will be presented over the coming months that I'm sure will pique your interest. And we have a special guest next month, Lockie Scott, who is, and I'm gonna have to read this. He's the principal investigator on the space object tracking mission of the NeoSat microsatellite. He's with the Defense Research and Development Canada. You can see his topic that he'll be discussing next month. He'll discuss why Canadian forces care about space, the sensors they use, the objects they track, why they do it, and some of the testing they do on orbit. He'll also share a small bit of astronomy courtesy of the NeoSat astronomy mission team who work at the Canadian Space Agency. I'm sure you won't want to miss this one. So please join us next month for that. And there's the calendar. You'll note that on October the 3rd is the next members meeting. The October board meeting is on the 29th. We do have a board meeting on September 24. The stars that you see there are 3 of the sessions of the Explore the Universe that our very own John Reed and National's Jenna Hines are involved in. And then we have the Insiders Galaxy that are also done on Tuesdays and Thursdays of the month. You can go to the Rask National website and they will certainly have all the other events of special speaker presentations as well as center meetings. And it is with great regret and sadness that we report the death on September 3rd of our longtime member, Walter Zakauskas. To those members who knew Walter, our condolences. Walter served on our board for several years in the past and was our president in 1972. He taught physics at Dalhousie and was one of the great contributors running the education and public outreach program in the old Halifax Planetarium for decades. He was, and I'll quote one of our members, he was a brilliant man, generous with his time and expertise, patient, kind, gentle, with a warm smile and a perpetual twinkle in his eye. We certainly send our condolences to his wife, Teresa, and their family for their great loss. Any questions? Any questions at all regarding the...
I have a question, Judy.
Sure.
I used to work at Defense R&D Canada, and I'm curious, the speaker, Lockie
Scott,
what center or what branch of the RTC does he come from?
I know he resides in Ottawa. Beyond that,
Okay, that answers it. There's an establishment there. Yeah.
and in fact, I think Lockie is listening in. So if he wants to put something in the chat,
Okay. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Now, yeah, he says Defense R&D Canada, Ottawa, the Space Systems Group. Thank you, Lockie. One of the activities that we have within the center that I'm not reporting on, I'm going to leave it up to a couple of other members to address, is our partnership with the Discovery Center, the Science Center here in Halifax. And there's been a lot of activity with the Discovery Center over the past year, and it's thanks in large part to two gentlemen in our center, Peter Hurley and Wayne Harasimovich. Thank you both. Peter is currently serving as a director and as our center's secretary, and he has a personal interest in the center and is very keen to ensure the success of both parties in this endeavor. And Wayne has had a long time interest in the night skies and currently serves as a director and as our center's librarian when we have access to our books. And he is truly keen about the Mars expeditions and regrets that he won't be on that planet to have some fun. So, gentlemen, I will leave the floor to you so that you can advise us of what's going on with the Discovery Center.
Well, hello, everybody. And Peter, if it sounds like I'm going to win this, I am. I lost the paperwork. So let's be very, very, yeah, really. We'll be really casual here, but we'll be to the point and quick because I'm really looking forward to the rest of the meeting and some of the presentations, Pat's and Dave's. So we have an opportunity that's coming up in the next little while, specifically the weekend of September 26th and 27th at the Discovery Center. The center has, like everyone else, been struggling with operations since COVID. They were closed down for quite a few months and only recently opened up Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And even with that, they have reduced operations. They're open for 3 hours in the morning from 9 a.m. until 12, and from 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock, each one of those 4 days in the afternoon. To draw people in, they have themed weekends. Every second weekend, there's a different theme. And on the weekend of the 26th and 27th, there's going to be an astronomy thing. And yes, some of it has to do with International Observe the Moon Night. So we were approached, Peter and I, as well as Tony, on possibly putting something together. Well, right away, the creative juices started flowing, and we've come up with an idea. And it wasn't without a whole lot of discussion with the Discovery Center, because above everything else, our concern is for our members and their safety, those people that might want to volunteer to help out on that weekend. So COVID is always front and center in our minds, and as well with the Discovery Center, they've got a pretty impressive policy in place to control traffic flow, the numbers of people. In fact, you have to go on and online and purchase tickets ahead of schedule. We'll get to that in a second. We'll talk a little bit about what we have planned for that particular weekend. Discovery Center's gone out of their way to give us pretty much whatever we want. We've got carte blanche. The plan is that we'll have 3 activity areas. The first will be an information booth where we'll have planispheres that we'll be able to hand out, and we'll have those put together in advance of the weekend so that we can allow any of the germs, our little friends, to dissipate into wherever it is they go after 5 days. They don't live so well on paper, at least that type of material. The other information that will be available there is specific to the center, and RASC is a national organization. Meetings, things like that, and what we do, our public outreach, in case anybody's interested in that sort of thing, to once things normalize again, will be available. I've got my cat here rubbing up against me, so sorry about the extra noise. But the, Obi, what are you doing? The second table We'll probably have to have that first information table with likely at least one person, possibly two. And we can float around. We can be creative and allowing, there. That's what I get for trying to ignore him or her. In any event, the second activity area will be dedicated to telescopes. We'd like to have a good cross-section of members' telescopes, everything from really, really simple to excuse me, all right, from really, really simple to some of the tech, because some people like the tech that's involved in their scopes. You know, some of the imaging that we do with them is pretty high end. We're also going to feature folks within the center who have taken images, and we have two 5-foot monitors. One of them will be behind the telescopes, and they'll be constantly running images that our members have taken using, hopefully, the telescopes that will be on display. Otherwise, they'll give people a pretty good a good indication of the kind of things that members do within the Halifax Center and what astronomy, how it's changed. It's not just looking through that little eyepiece anymore. So we'll probably need a person for that as well. And then thirdly, and this is kind of neat, Tony came up with a great idea of having a little bit of a contest. People will be able to come up and view one of our other 5-foot screens where we'll have a collage of images. And it's a little bit of a contest. So I'll use this as an example. We'll have a picture of, say, the Grand Canyon, and on one side of the screen. On the other side of the screen, we'll have an image from Mars that looks an awful lot like the Grand Canyon, but it's actually, I believe it's Valles Marineris. What we'll do is we'll just ask some real brief questions, because we'd like people to stay maybe 10 minutes so they can move along and maintain that individual little bubble of separation between folks. And what we'd like to do is just ask them, like, where do you think they're from? Some may recognize the Grand Canyon. I would expect most would. But I think they'll be really surprised to see the image from Mars, not just how they took it, how it was taken with the spacecraft above the planet's surface, but a lot of the geological mechanisms that are in play right here on Earth are also on our sister planet, Mars. So that sort of thing is going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. And it's going to take a little bit of work. So that's where we're going to be looking for our volunteers. So we've got the 3 areas. We're going to want people that can just sit for 3 hours and talk to the public. I know there will be spacing again. I can't overemphasize that. Possibly some people at the telescope area discussing the telescopes and things like that. And then, of course, people that wouldn't mind participating in the little contest affair. And again, all of this is very, very fluid, but we're also going to need people to put together slide presentations. So Peter and I were discussing earlier this morning about the possibility of sending out a brief description of exactly what we're looking for. We're going to be sending it out on the discussion list. And folks will be able to digest that a little bit more than the little snapshot they're getting right now, and see how they can participate in the event and support activities here with the Halifax Center. It's going to be an awful lot of fun. Again, it's going to be Saturday the 26th and 2 sessions. First one in the morning from 9 to 12, the second in the afternoon from 1 to 4. If you could do both of them, great, but we don't want to wear you down. And it's a nice time of the year too, so we don't want to waste any good days that we have. If you can come on for 3 hours, that's great. We have a similar session on Sunday in the morning and the afternoon. Mornings on Sundays are pretty quiet, so if you want to make yourself available for a less busy time, that's great. The actual setup of the displays and telescopes, really condensed, but we'll provide information to those people who might want to be make their telescopes or themselves available, again, early next week. So when it's all said and done, I don't know, Peter, have I missed anything there?
I think the only thing I can remember we talked about was the telescopes will be behind a security cordon.
Yeah.
So we can talk about them, but nobody will be touching or handling the telescopes, so there's no issue with cleaning or disinfection.
Yeah, the way we have it set up is that there'll be barricades up, and there'll be at least 3 feet between the barricade and the closest telescope. And they're going to be tucked into a corner so people will be able to see them, but at the same time, no touchy-feely. It would be great to have people, being able to get a little closer, not just to the telescopes, but with everything else. A lot of, it'll be face-to-face, or in this case, mask-to-mask. It'd be great, but unfortunately, times have changed a little bit, and we're doing a pretty good job, all things considered, but it's a little different. So again, Pete, if you can think of anything else that we might have, or I may have missed.
Oh, I think the only other thing was that we did discuss very clearly with the people at the Discovery Center that if there are any changes in the health status, if there are more cases reported, that volunteers are free to make their own decision about whether they participate or not. The Discovery Center themselves may cancel this, and we may, but here's to hoping that there won't be any increase in cases in the next 2 weeks. And this, we're excited about the possibility here. Yeah,
the Discovery Center obviously wants to develop a partnership with us, and we're doing our part to help them through a time that's offering challenges. The spin-off is that people get to see how wonderful this hobby, and in some cases lifestyle, is. Astronomy is nothing amateur about it. It's you just talk to folks and they get really excited. So it's a great opportunity for us to showcase astronomy, and the support of the membership would be really, really great in any small way as possible. We're going to take it real easy on you, and it's a short weekend too, and it's a limited number of hours. So, and again, as Peter said, the safety of our membership and the general public is super, super important. It's number one on our list, and the same thing with Discovery Center. We'll end up having. It could happen that if the numbers start to go up and things start to shut down, it may all fold. But we hope for the best and prepare for the worst, and that's just about all we could talk about that. You'll hear more the beginning of next week. It's going to be a busy week, so everybody check their emails. I'm sure it's going to be a very, very interesting little while here for the Halifax Center. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to toss this out to you. More coming next week. On behalf of Peter and myself, thanks again. Over to you, Judy.
Thanks so much, gentlemen. So just to, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
One more point I just remembered is that the Discovery Center, as well as requiring people to purchase tickets in advance, they're limiting attendance to 200 people per 3-hour session. They have 4 floors, and they will control the number of people that are on each of the floors, just to try and minimize numbers, maintain distancing.
Okay, that's good.
How did you do that, Peter? You talked and you sneezed at the same time.
You're special. Okay, thank you so much for that. We'll look forward to hearing more. And just to repeat I guess basically we will be looking for volunteers for those sessions. So if interested, again, contact us, and we'll certainly make sure that we get you in touch with Peter or with Wayne for that event. Sounds like it'll be an exciting one and an interesting one. So thank you very much for organizing this. Next up is our one of our monthly features on the Observer's Handbook. And the topic this month is solar observing. And as Roy would be wanting to say, it is on pages 186 of the handbook. So if you're interested in finding out what David Hoskin is going to be talking about, that's where you can find the information. David is a longtime observer and is interested in all aspects of astronomy. especially in the astroimaging aspect of things. He's one of the few Canadian RASC members that has received all 3 of the astroimaging certificates. And he's been very active here locally in outreach activities for our center. And so without further ado, I will leave it to you, Dave.
Everyone seeing that?
Yep, you're good.
Good?
Got it,
Okay.
Dave.
All right, and let's get my full laser pointer. All right, so I think most people, when they see dawn approaching after a night of observing, start to pack up their telescopes, but that may be a little premature, because with some fairly inexpensive equipment, you can observe some very interesting things on the sun, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, the first rule of solar observing is safety. I mean, everyone knows that you never look directly at the sun, and even if you try during the daylight, it's so bright that there's an autonomic response. You're going to blink and look away. But direct exposure of your retina to the intense sunlight can cause a lot of damage. And every time there's a solar eclipse, there are always a few people that present at emergency rooms with severe, sometimes permanent damage to their eyesight. So, here is a picture of a retina of a woman who looked at a solar eclipse. You can see actually the outline of the sun and the bite taken out of it by the eclipse starting. And that's a permanent injury. It's even worse through a telescope. So, if you've bought a telescope recently, there's for sure been a sticker on it. Don't look at the sun with this telescope. If you have a go-to with a handset, there's always a warning there about looking directly at the sun with the telescope. So the one way to do some solar observing, and this is really the least expensive way, is through a process called eyepiece projection. And one simply situates a piece of white cardstock paper behind the eyepiece at the distance where you find focus, and the image of the sun is projected on that piece of cardstock. And that works with refractors or with reflectors. The difference being that with a refractor, you also need some kind of sun shield, so that you're actually projecting into shadow. That's not an issue so much with a reflector. So that's something everyone can try. And this is often used to observe eclipses, and that's what you actually see in this picture is the start of a solar eclipse. I think this was in 2015. The other way to do some solar observing that doesn't cost too much money is to use solar safety filters, and there are a number of different types of filters. There are glass filters made by Thousand Oaks, and those are probably the most expensive. There's black polymer filters, mylar film filters, batter film filters. They're all safe for solar viewing. You can buy a sheet of the black polymer film from Amazon for not too much money, and at the end of the talk, I'll show a link to a website that tells you how you can make your own solar filters. You can buy them commercially. These are two that I have, a black polymer filter that I got with one of my first telescopes, and a mylar filter, which is pretty similar to the batter film filter. And this is one I actually prefer. And here is something I want to point out from a safety issue again. Never use an eyepiece filter. Anyone that has one of the classic telescopes from the 70s and 80s, probably in the lens collection, had a dark filter that screwed into the eyepiece. Sadly, you can still buy this type of filter from China for a few bucks, and I'm afraid the very low cost might tempt some people, but bad idea, because what happens is you screw these filters into the end of an eyepiece, and if you imagine the sunlight coming through the objective of a refractor, for example, and then that's magnifying it, right? It's like a magnifying glass, and the heat buildup around that piece of dark glass in the eyepiece filter will quite quickly shatter the filter, and then you get a burst of concentrated sunlight right into your eye and instant blindness. So, if you have one of these, some people say take a hammer to it. If you want to keep your classic scope accessories intact, put it away in a drawer, but never use it. Along those lines, when you're using one of these types of filters, before you use them, make sure that the filter is intact, that there's no pinholes in it. And that's pretty easy to do. You just hold it up in your hand to the sun and see if you can see any bright pinholes where unobstructed sunlight's coming through. These filters will block 99.999% of the sunlight, so it protects your vision quite well. You can get these types of safety filters for refractors, Schmidt-Cassegrains, reflectors. Notice that these filters are mounted very securely. There's Velcro straps holding them in place, and again, that's a safety feature. You don't want a strong gust of wind lifting your solar filter off your telescope while you're observing, and resulting in severe or permanent eye damage. So you want to make sure that these filters are securely attached. And at the same time, if you've got a finder scope, make sure it's capped so you don't inadvertently glance through it at the sun, again, causing eye damage. And don't leave telescopes that you're using for solar observing unattended in case a child comes along and decides to have a look and maybe wonders what that filter is for and take it off, and with sad consequences. So again, safety is an issue. You don't even need a telescope necessarily. These so-called eclipse glasses will let you see the solar disk, and you're not going to see a lot unless there's an immense sunspot on the solar disk, but you will be able to see the sun safely with those glasses. Again, make sure that they're from a reputable supplier. There was an issue in the last eclipse with fake solar glasses appearing that weren't providing necessary protection. And you can even buy filters that fit on the end of binoculars, which is another nice way to do solar observing. And you can make your own do-it-yourself filters with Mylar film that'll do the same thing. So how do you safely find the sun? You might think that, gee, the sun's a big bright object, it's pretty easy to find. Well, the first time you try some solar observing, you're going to realize that it could be really frustrating getting the sun in your eyepiece after you've got that filter on. It actually isn't that big. One way to at least get into the ballpark of where the sun is you move your mount for the telescope around until the smallest possible shadow is cast. And that means that you're lined up with the sun. Another way is to use a commercial or make your own solar finder. This is one that I made. It's just a block of wood with a V cut in the bottom so that it sits on the optical tube of my refractors, and I've got a pinhole in one end here, and a target dot at the other end, and the sunlight shines through the pinhole. And when it's lined up with the target dot that I've got here, I know that I'm pointed at the sun, and the sun's then in my field of view. The advantage then is that you're not using a finder scope with filters. It's very straightforward and works quite well. So what can you see when you start solar observing? Well, the obvious thing is to look at sunspots, and those simple solar filters that I've described will show sunspots. You can see them with eyepiece projection as well, if they're large enough. Sunspots develop from plage and faculae, which are bright patches and structures on areas of the solar surface that are magnetically active. Sunspots form as a result of intense magnetic fields that with flux that disrupts the convection of solar material. The surface of the sun is like a pot of boiling water. It's constantly moving, and if that convection's disrupted, then the area gets cooler, and that shows up as a sunspot. The darkest area of the sunspot is the umbra, shown here, the center, and that is the coolest. And then the penumbra, which is a grayish area surrounding the umbra, is a little warmer, but again, still cooler than the rest of the solar surface. Now, cool is a relative term. The coolest areas of a sunspot, the umbra, are about 2,700 to 4,000 degrees centigrade, whereas this area of the sun is about 5,500 degrees centigrade. So still plenty hot. You wouldn't want to stick your toes in it. Now, sunspots have been known for quite some time. The first sunspots were first recorded by ancient Chinese and Greek scholars, and those must have been really huge sunspots because they didn't have telescopes. They would have been doing naked eye observing at sunset when the sun's very low in the horizon and the atmosphere acts as a filter. So those must have been really gigantic sunspots for them to be able to make out. Sunspots form, as I said, from these bright areas, these plages and faculae, which in turn become pores, and then from the pores develop into the actual sunspots. There's some fine detail in a sunspot that can also become visible if you've got enough magnification and the proper instruments. There's a core to the umbra. There's a graininess within the penumbra, and there's even a dark nucleus. One feature that you'll sometimes find is called a light bridge. So you get basically a protrusion of the penumbra on either side of the sunspot meeting up, and it splits the umbra. Those light bridges form over several days, and they usually indicate the beginning of a sunspot's decay process. You can image sunspots through using both afocal. This is a picture I took just holding my cell phone camera up to the eyepiece of a small refractor with the Mylar type solar filter on, and I got these two sunspots. This is another image taken with a different type of filter that preserves the orange hue of the sun. And this was done prime focus imaging. And this is another image I took a couple of years ago of a rather large sunspot, and the umbra and penumbra and show up quite nicely. And you can even see some of the convection cells around that particular sunspot. Sunspots can last for days to months. They expand and contract as they move across the sun's surface, so the view always changes. We're currently at a solar minimum, which means we're beginning the next cycle of sunspots. So we're beginning cycle 25. So there should be more and more sunspots appearing. We've had but almost a year of pretty much blank solar disks. So now is a good time to start thinking about doing some solar observing. Solar cycles last about 11 years. Now, sunspots can be large or they can be small. That means they can be anywhere from 16 kilometers in diameter, so you're not going to see them very easily, to immense, 100,000 kilometers. This is a image of a sunspot that appeared was visible the 23rd of October, 2014. It was huge, and just to give you a sense of the size, it was as big as the planet Jupiter, and dwarfed our own planet. Sunspots are often associated with solar flares and coronal mass ejections. So as those intense magnetic fields undergo flux, they can cross, they can tangle. You know, it's kind of like Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams. When that happens, there's a massive release of energy, and that we see that as a solar flare, and sometimes those flares are associated with the ejection of solar material, radiation and charged particles out into space. And if those charged particles interact with our planet, with planet's magnetic field, we see auroras, northern lights forming. This is a drawing of a sunspot by Richard Carrington, and some of you may have heard of the Carrington event, which was a massive solar storm, which the charged particles impacted the Earth, and northern lights, aurora, were seen as far south as the Caribbean, and there was so much charged particles in the Earth's atmosphere that telegraphs caught on fire, the wires caught on fire, telegraph operators got shocked, and the telegraphs still functioned even when they weren't hooked up to power. There was so much power in the charge in the atmosphere. If you want to get into more advanced solar observing and you want to visualize solar plasma ejections, prominences are what they're called when you see them edge at an angle. If you're looking edge on, they're filaments. You can see these structures, but you have to use dedicated solar telescopes, and these are fitted with narrow band filters in the hydrogen alpha and the calcium K-line frequencies. But those will allow you to visualize not only sunspots, but detail on the solar surface, prominences and filaments and spicules as well. This is a dedicated solar telescope. You may have seen this if you've been to Nova East during the daytime. There's usually one of these set up on the observing field. You know, they're pricey, and as you get more elaborate filters and larger aperture, they rapidly become quite expensive. There's one other piece of equipment that is sometimes used for solar observing, but less frequently now, I think, than in years past. And this is called a Herschel wedge. It's basically a diagonal with a prism in it that splits off about 95 to 98% of the sunlight, and only a small portion then moves into the eyepiece. There's also a pre-filter which blocks a large part of the sunlight as well. So that's for safety reasons, but you don't see these too often. They're you know, potentially dangerous. If that pre-filter is damaged, then you get more light than you want coming through the eyepiece. So just to summarize, some solar observing activities you can observe with your own eyes. You can count sunspots in groups. and hopefully we're going to be seeing more and more sunspots as the current solar cycle develops. You can sketch those sunspots like Richard Carrington did, and of course you can image with your cell phones, just holding up to the eyepiece and doing some afocal imaging of the solar spots. Some resources. This is a good one, space weather. It tells you every day if there are any sunspots developing and where to look for them. NASA has a couple sites dedicated to solar observatories. And this is the link that I mentioned for a do-it-yourself solar safety filter, which is a pretty easy project to undertake. And I think that's all. So any questions?
Actually, Dave, there was one from Kim Hay, and she says, can you clean the black polymer? I have water spots on it.
I would think so. The black polymer is pretty tough. So I wouldn't use a solvent, but I wouldn't see any problem with putting some distilled water on a cotton swab and just running it over it. But those water spots shouldn't really make much of a difference. You know, the sun's going to be if they're really dirty spots, you might get a bit of dimming, but I don't think it would make a big difference. But it shouldn't hurt to clean it as long as you're gentle. I just say the black polymer has the advantage over the mylar and the batter film in that it's much tougher and less likely to develop pinholes or tears.
Okay, thanks so much for that, David. It's quite interesting. So I'm sure, hopefully, those of you that are considering purchasing a solar telescope to view the sun, keep some of the points that David had presented in mind. Last but not least is our special presentation by Pat Kelly entitled All About Mars, the Science of What You're Seeing. This presentation is actually part 6 of the Nova East Special Speakers Series. It will be, as you know, this whole session is being recorded. It will be part of this recording, but it'll also be a separate entity under the Nova East presentations on the RASC YouTube site. Pat is a longtime member of our center. He has served many roles on our board, certainly been an active observer. He's currently our National Council representative and sits as a director on our board. And if he doesn't have a pair of binoculars out at the night sky, he's out there during the day looking at birds. So he's constantly got something up here. But today, because of the prominence of Mars in our viewing coming up and now, we've asked Pat to do this presentation. So Pat, thank you so much for this, and take it away.
I even remember to unmute first this time. Okay, so I assume at some point, oh, yes, the share screen's down at the bottom. And right. I think we should be good to go. I'd like to thank Judy for, Dave Chapman actually, who originally sort of twisted my arm to give a talk as part of the COVID-19 version of Nova East. And I originally had made this talk a little bit on the shorter side. Well, it was a bit longer, but then I thought, it's not a standalone talk anymore. And I actually heard somebody use a term I'd never heard the other day, which is Zoom bottom, which is when your butt gets sore from sitting through too many Zoom presentations. So this is going to be a little bit shorter than the over 1 hour ones that some of the other ones have been. At least I'm going to try and keep it to that. And basically the reason why Mars is of great interest to a lot of people is because it undergoes an opposition on occasion. And so I thought what I'd do is I'd talk about why we have oppositions, what oppositions are, why Mars is so special, and a bit about what you might want to learn about how to observe it during this, because I made some really bad mistakes when I first observed my very first opposition of Mars. And by opposition, most people, when they hear the word opposition, they think of those people in Parliament that start whacking the desks with their hands and making weird grunting noises. It's not that type of opposition. Opposition is an astronomy term, and astronomers tend to get excited over them, especially the oppositions of Mars. And these oppositions only happen to superior planets, which are the planets that actually have orbits bigger than the orbit of the Earth. So if you actually sort of take a look at a little schematic diagram of what the solar system looks like, we have the sun at the center, we have the Earth, which is over here, moving around the sun in a circle and moving along in a reasonably good clip. So the little arrow there just shows you that we're moving, that's just an arbitrary length. It just shows that we're moving. And outside the orbit of the Earth, we have superior planets moving in their orbits. And the funny thing about superior planets, whenever you see a diagram about oppositions, the superior planet they always show is red. I've very rarely seen a diagram where it's not red, because usually Mars is the one that people are most interested in. And as you can see, one of the interesting things about our solar system and the way that gravity works is that the further away you are from the sun, you move around the sun more slowly, and you have a much bigger orbit in which to go around. So you're not only moving slower to start with, you actually have a much bigger distance to travel to go all the way around once. And as I mentioned, the planets that actually do this, the ones that we actually have to deal with in orbit, in order coming out from the Earth, we have Mars, which is the closest planet, and then we have the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And those are the 5 planets that actually can have oppositions. And what I'm going to sort of show you is a bit about why these oppositions occur at the rate that they do, and why in particular Mars makes such an interesting one to look at. So in the diagram, you saw that Earth, actually if I just back up for a second, you can see that opposition occurs at the point where the Earth lies between the sun and the superior planet. So once you have one opposition, the Earth continues merrily along its way. The superior planet, i.e. Mars, also continues merrily along its way. So one of the questions is, once you have an opposition, how long does it take until you have the next opposition of the same planet? So that is, when you look at the 5 superior planets, it brings in a term called the synodic period. And the synodic period is basically how long it takes the sun and the Earth and a planet to go from any given arrangement back to the same arrangement. So from one opposition to the next opposition is the synodic period of the planet. And it comes from the word meaning synod. Most people, the only place you'll ever come across the word synod is it's a gathering of the hierarchy of a church, is usually where you end up hearing word a synodic council or something. And it means a getting together. And in this case, they're getting together in a line with, again, as you can see, this caption says it's for a superior planet. Note that the planet is red. So what you're going to see when I run this little illustration is you're going to see we're going to start off with opposition. The Earth continues on, and as I mentioned, the other planet continues on, but it's moving slower. And as a result, by the time the Earth catches up to it again, you can see that the synodic period, how long it takes the Earth to go around till it's lined back up at opposition again, it's always going to be longer than a year. Because during the first year that goes around, the planet has moved a bit. Now, the farther out it is in its orbit, the slower it's moving and the bigger its orbit has to be. So the synodic period gets closer and closer and closer to a year as you go further and further out into the solar system. So if we take a look at the 5 planets that have superior orbits and that therefore have oppositions and look at their synodic period, if you take a look at Neptune, you can see that Neptune's synodic period is 368 days. In other words, it really doesn't go very far in the time it takes the Earth to go around its orbit once. Now, the next planet in, Uranus, doesn't do much better. We only have to go an extra 2 days in order to catch up with these planets. So their oppositions tend to come around at almost the same time every year. They're a few days later, but they don't change very much from one year to the next. You just get a few days later, a few days later, a few days later. And if you go back through a stack of observers' handbooks and look up, say, the date of the opposition of Neptune in 1 year, it's going to be very easy to find the next year. Go to the same month and look a few days later, and you'll find it. It doesn't move all that far. You come a little bit closer, and Saturn, it's still only up 10 days compared to what it was for Neptune. Now, when you come into Jupiter, now we're starting to get somewhere. Jupiter is close enough that its orbit is smaller and it's moving faster, that its synodic period is just under 400 days. Now, since the year has about 365, that's about 30 days. I'm just going to round off to 30 days. 30 days is about 1 month. So in the case of Jupiter, once you have an opposition of Jupiter, the next opposition is going to happen 1 month later. And since there's 12 months in the year and 13 officially zodiac constellations, if you look at Jupiter, every year its opposition moves it on average from one constellation to the next. It moves along in a fairly good clip. So what about Mars? Well, Mars is quite close to the Earth, so it's moving not that much slower, and its orbit is bigger than the Earth, but it's not that much bigger. So in the case of Mars, the synodic period is 780 days, which is over 2 years. So if you take a look at that, I'm going to get back to this, the fact that it's over 2 years in a bit, but that's one of the main reasons why oppositions of Mars are greatly looked forward to with anticipation, is because they only come roughly every 2 years. In fact, it's 2 years and a bit. So unlike the other planets, you know you're going to get one, if you have an opposition with Jupiter in July, next year it's going to be in August. So you just wait a year and a bit and you've got it. Mars, it's not quite so simple. You've got to wait 2 years plus a bit. Now, for all the planets that are superior planets, as the Earth moves around in its orbit, if we just assume that the superior planet is just sort of staying there, or if it's, for example, a superior planet like Neptune that doesn't really move very much in the amount of time it takes the Earth to go from here around to here. So this would be the planet at opposition when we're closest to it. And around here is when we're just coming around from the sun and we have a clear view to it again. And as you can see, the Earth is going to be closest to a superior planet when it's at opposition. And when it's on the opposite side of the orbit, it's not as close. So as the Earth goes around in its orbit, from synodic period to synodic period, the distance to the planet changes. And what the distance to the planet does is it changes two of the observable object properties of that planet. In particular, it changes its apparent size, how big it appears when you look at it through a telescope, and it also changes the brightness of it as you look at it, even just with your naked eye. It's noticeable for some of these. So if we take, for example, a look at apparent size, and again, I'm going to start off with the outer part of the solar system. As you can imagine, Neptune is very far away from the sun. So the distance from the Earth to Neptune is not going to change very much regardless of which size of the Earth's orbit it's on. So in the case of Neptune, the angular size of the planet as seen from Earth goes from 2.1 arc seconds when it's at opposition, or when we're just coming around the sun and can see it, to 2.3 arc seconds when it is at opposition. So not really a big change, and that's to be expected. For those of you who want to get an idea of just, I've actually used real units here. In fact, there's 10 arc seconds, there's a pixel for every arc second in these images. But to just give you an idea of just how small these angles are, 1 degree is divided into 60 seconds. So if you imagine taking a protractor that you had when you were in school, that was usually marked off in 1 degree increments around the outside, take each of those, divide into 60 smaller units. Those are arc minutes. Then take one of those little tiny subdivisions and make it into 60 even smaller units. Those are arc seconds. So there's 3,600 of these arc seconds in 1 degree. And to give you an idea of just how small an arc second is, if you take a $2 coin, which I imagine most of you may have handy, if you take a $2 coin and place it 5 kilometers from you, and then look at the angle from one side of that coin to the other, not the not thin on, but say you're looking at the polar bear face on, 1 arc second is the angle from one side of the coin to the other. It's a very small angle. And in fact, I'm actually amazed that astronomers with modern technology can actually measure micro arc seconds, which would be literally like being able to see the fur, the hairs in the fur on the polar bear from 5 kilometers away. That's an amazing sort of thing of measurement. If we come into Uranus, it's a little bit closer to us, so it appears a bit bigger than Neptune does. But again, because it's so far out, its angular size doesn't really change that much. It goes from 3.3 to 4. Now, Saturn is a much larger object, but But again, it's still far enough away from us that in the difference from when we see it just coming around the sun to when we see it at opposition, it doesn't get that much bigger. In fact, generally, most people tend to notice more about Saturn is that instead of its actual size or apparent size, is the tilt of the rings. That's usually the thing that really stands out for people as we look at it over extended periods of time. It's the changing angle of the rings going from full on to thin to full on again that people generally tend to notice more than they notice that, oh, it looks a little bit bigger than it did 5 months ago or 6 years ago or whatever it was. Now, Jupiter, as you can imagine, is going to look even bigger than Saturn. And this is Saturn, Jupiter to scale. You can see that it's much larger in angular size than all the other planets. These are all actually at the same relative measurements. But even Jupiter only goes from 30 arc seconds up to about 50. So it doesn't even get twice as big when it comes up to opposition. So why is it that Mars is the one that causes all the concern? This is why. Mars actually gets 7 times bigger from the time we can see it when we come around the sun or before it disappears behind the sun to opposition. And as you can see, it gets almost as big as Jupiter at its smallest. So if you want to see a lot of detail or a lot of surface features on Mars, the time to do it is at opposition when it is a really, really large object. Okay. So over the last 6 months on either side of the upcoming opposition, this is a little diagram that I found online. This shows what Mars looks like from Earth. And as you can see, on March the 20th of this year, it was relatively small. In March 21st of next year, it's going to be relatively small. And you're almost here. When it's opposition, it's going to be that big. And that's why oppositions of Mars are such a really, really big thing. It's because you get to see lots of detail with even a relatively small telescope and relatively low magnifications compared to what you need at other times of the year. Now, I also mentioned brightness as one of the other things that changes things for Mars. And this is a diagram that was in the 2020 Observer's Handbook. One of the nice things that I'm able to do is because I'm the one that provides the diagram is I can go in and change it around any way I want. So I've stripped out a lot of the stuff and left only the 3 visible superior planets. So Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And as you can see in the case of Jupiter, Jupiter had its opposition back in July. So Jupiter's brightness gradually increased and gradually increased. And it reached a maximum in the middle of July when it reached opposition, and then it sort of faded away again. But notice that it doesn't really change in brightness that much. And that's because, if you remember from the diagram, Jupiter's size doesn't really change all that much. Same thing with Saturn. Here we have Saturn. It gets somewhat brighter at opposition, but fades again afterwards. But again, it's not a huge change in brightness. In fact, I suspect if you actually worked it out numerically, you might find that the actual brightness of Saturn is more dependent on how open its ring system is than how close it is to the Earth. I didn't actually do that, but that would be my first guess. And then you can see Mars. Mars comes out at the start of this year out of nowhere. And you can see that as it comes up to opposition, its brightness goes way up. And then after opposition, its brightness is going to go down just as quickly. And as Dave pointed out, it's almost as bright as Jupiter. And it's not quite as bright as Jupiter, probably because it's not quite as reflective of a surface, and also because it's not quite as big as Jupiter. And Jupiter is near its opposition right now. And if you're wondering, just to give you a comparison, Venus would be running around in the upper part of this diagram. So Venus is still by far the brighter of the planets. But as you can see, Mars puts on a real show when it comes up to opposition, and then it very quickly sort of tends to disappear again. Okay, I'm going to go back to this idea of how long Mars' synodic period is, because I'm then going to show you a diagram that's in the handbook that, like most things that Roy Bishop produces, is very dense in information. So I mentioned that the synodic period is about 780 days. And if you break that down, that's 2 years plus about 50 days. So you notice that unlike Jupiter, which it's about 1 year plus a month, in the case of Mars, it's 2 years plus almost 2 months. And what that means And again, if you look in the Observer's Handbook, you're going to find this diagram. There's a lot of stuff in this diagram I'm not going to bother with, because I just want to point out some of the main things about it. So here we have the sun at the center. Here we have the orbit of the Earth, and the months along here indicate which month it is if you're on the Earth. So if the Earth is over here, it's November. If the Earth is over here, it's December, and so on and so on and so on. Out here we have the orbit of Mars, and next to the orbit of Mars we have the constellation it's in. So if Mars is here, it's in the constellation of Aries, which is a winter constellation. If it's over here, it's in Cancer, which is a spring constellation, and so on. And then there's 4 diagrams that sort of show Mars, and the size of the circle, the big circle, is its maximum angular size in arc seconds. You can see over here it's 24, which is what we're sort of gearing up to a little bit. And then the other thing about this diagram is you notice that it's indicated in here with lines when the oppositions of Mars actually occur. So over here we have the one in 2018, and you notice that the one from 2018, the next one, this one in 2020, is 2 years, so 2020, plus start of August, start of September, right there. So 2 months and a bit. And the next one is going to be in 2 years, 2022, and again about 2 months. The next one is going to be 2 years, but that extra 2 months adds up. So every 5 synodic periods, you have to throw an extra year. And you'll see what happens here is this one goes from here. We've switched over into January. This one occurs in 2025. And then the next one is in 2027 when Earth is here and Mars is here. 2029, Earth is here, Mars is here. 2031 and 2033. So the diagram that's in the handbook shows you all of the oppositions of Mars, as the title says, from 2018 to 2033. And you can really easily see from this diagram how elliptical Mars's orbit is. So if you look, for example, at the orbit of the Earth, it looks pretty circular. Whereas you can clearly see that Mars is closer to the Earth, or closer to the sun on this side, and farther from the sun on this side. So you think, okay, well, ideally, what you're going to want is you're going to want to have oppositions when Mars is over here at its closest. Okay, there's problems with that, though. The first problem is we're viewing it from Nova Scotia. So when the oppositions occur when it's really south, so I've got a diagram here that sort of shows the southern sky is seen from Nova Scotia. Here's Scorpius down here, just to sort of give you a bit of an idea of what you're looking at. This is Sagittarius. This is the east, this is the west, and this is the celestial equator projected onto the nighttime sky. And this is the zenith right over here. So this is the point looking straight up overhead. And here we have the ecliptic. This is where the planets are found. So if Mars happens to be in this particular part of the sky, and this is actually on the June solstice, objects in the sky tend to circle. They rise, they cross the sky, and they set in the west. And you'll notice that if you have a planet like Mars that happens to be here, it's going to rise, come up as far as there, which is not very high above the horizon, and set in the west. So it's not really going to get all that far above the horizon at our latitude. And in the summertime, as you're probably well aware, you tend to have a lot of haze in the sky. You're looking through a lot of this atmosphere. And that turbulence, by looking at that extra atmosphere, is going to degrade the seeing, which determines how sharp a view of the planet you're actually going to get. So we think, okay, well, that's fine. Are there any other problems with observing when they're really close? Yes, there is. So here's the Earth and here's Mars at the actual right relative sizes to show you how large one is compared to the other. And both of these planets, just by coincidence, happen to have inclinations that are almost exactly the same. 23.5 degrees for Earth, 25.2 degrees for Mars. And what that means, as we know on Earth, is that as the Earth goes around the sun, we get summer in the northern hemisphere, and then we get winter in the northern hemisphere. The same thing happens for Mars. When Mars is on one side of its orbit, the northern hemisphere gets a lot more sunlight than the southern hemisphere does, and vice versa. So why is that a problem? Well, if we go back to this diagram, you see this big circle up here? This circle shows you the size and extent of the northern ice cap on Mars. And if Mars is over on this side of its orbit, where it's closest to the sun, it's summertime in the southern hemisphere of Mars. Here's the northern ice cap. It's nice and big. And you can see on the opposite side, the northern ice cap is now getting a lot of sunlight and it's much, much smaller. Now, why would that be a problem? Well, one of the problems is that because the southern hemisphere gets a lot of extra sunlight during the summertime, that extra heat drives winds that are much stronger typically than they are during the rest of Mars's orbit. So when you tend to have Mars at the point in its orbit where it's really close to us, you also have the risk of planet-wide dust storms, which blot out all of your detail. Now, for those of you who think dust storms on Mars are anything at all like the ones depicted in the book or the movie The Martian, I hate to bring the bearer of bad news to you. There are dust storms on Mars. It does raise lots of dust blocking the view. It does not blow you off your feet or destroy your base or anything else that's described in The Martian. I've read the book, and the author freely admits that he couldn't have written the book if he didn't really overdo the winds on Mars. The rest of the book, if you're a geek at all, the rest of the book is an amazing read. It goes into a lot more of the science and exactly why and what happens and the scientific reasons why the guy does what he does in order to try and keep alive on Mars. But Mars's atmosphere is only 1% the thickness of Earth's atmosphere. And the force of moving gas depends on the speed and it depends on its density. So a 100 kilometer per hour wind on Mars is the same as a 1 kilometer per hour wind on Earth. And I don't know anybody who's ever been blown off their feet by a 1 kilometer per hour wind on Earth. So he freely admits he had to do that to get the novel started, but once it gets going, the science in it after that is really quite good. So that's another reason why you might run into a problem. You might want to say, well, that may not be the best time to actually have oppositions. Okay, well, what about oppositions when Mars is as high above the horizon? That gets rid of the problem that we have with all of the looking through all that dense, mucky atmosphere. So here we have the winter solstice in December. Here's Orion, there's Sirius, there's Gemini. Again, the white line is the celestial equator, going from one side to the other. The yellow line is the ecliptic, the place where you're going to find the planets. And as you can see, if you're a planet, you're going to come up, you're going to rise across the sky, and you're going to get almost overhead. You're going to get really, really high in the sky this time of the year. So you would think, well, that's got to be a benefit. But there is one drawback. So if we go with the other side, the drawback is twofold. First of all, when the ecliptic is really, really high, Mars is at the far point in its orbit. So the biggest it gets is nowhere near as big as it gets when it's over on this side of its orbit. So even in opposition, although Mars gets bigger, it gets not as big as it does because its orbit is highly elliptical. The other problem with this time of the year is it's bloody cold. So if you want to go in January or February, when Mars is up really high in the sky, you can, but the observing conditions aren't nearly as conducive to relaxing as they are in the summertime when you're looking through all that muck. So you would think then that the obvious compromise is going to be the other two sweet spots on either side, which are a compromise between distance of the planet at opposition and a fairly good elevation and reasonably good weather. And if you look, you'll see that the 2020 eclipse or the 2020 opposition and the next one in 2022 are both sort of in this neck of the woods. This one in particular, because October is actually quite a pleasant time in terms of weather. And if you look at where it's going to be in the sky, it's going to be about here. And therefore, as it goes across the sky, it's going to stay relatively high up above the horizon. So you get the best of both worlds. Relatively high elevation, fairly large diameter, so you can actually see it well, and relatively pleasant weather for all of that. Now, the other thing that often comes up is what time of the night is best for observing Mars when it's around opposition. And the answer to that is all night. Start when it's low in the east and keep observing until the sun comes up. And I'm going to show you why that is the case. So I use Voyager, the program, one of the programs that I use on my computer, to show what Mars is going to look like at midnight. So at midnight, it's going to be as high in the sky as it's going to get on October the 13th. And if I could see this detail in my little telescope, I would be very happy. In fact, I'd actually be worried that there's something wrong with my telescope or my eyesight. But you can see that there's going to be detail visible on Mars. And I'm going to show you Mars at midnight for a sequence of days. Sequence of hours, actually. And there's two things you're going to notice. One is you're going to be able to see Mars's rotation. And the other is you're going to see something else that is going to happen if you're like me, or if you have any telescope that uses an alt-azimuth mount. So I just want to let you be aware that this is going to happen, and so you're not wondering what the hell is going on. Okay, so here's what it looks at midnight. This is what's going to look like at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, if you go back one step, look at this marking here, and look at this marking here. And in the 1 hour from midnight to 1 o'clock, you can see that they've moved this way. So the planet, as seen from Earth, is rotating in this direction. It's rotating clockwise. 2 o'clock in the morning, that rotation continues. But you may have noticed something else is happening, especially if you've been looking. I'm going to just back up. Look at the South Polar Cap. Remember, it's somewhere in the southern hemisphere. So this is the southern ice cap, and it's very, very small now because it's summer. But you may have noticed that it's moving. It's not rotating with that in the same place. It's moving as well. Okay, so this is 1 o'clock. This is 2 o'clock. This is 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. So you'll notice that the rotation is fairly obvious. It's rotating in this direction, but the entire disk is also rotating, so that now the little ice cap is up there. What's that all about? Well, clearly the obvious rotation that you're seeing here is rotation because Mars is rotating on its own axis. This extra thing is because if you're looking at it with an alt-azimuth telescope, as it moves across the sky from being high in the sky to being low in the west, as it starts to set, it rotates. And we don't usually think of that as being something when you're looking at a planet, but we're very familiar with it from something like Orion. So when you see Orion rising, Orion rises more or less on his side. And then as Orion goes up into the sky, when he's due south, he's standing up nice and high. And then as he goes to the west, he's turned around. So you can see that from up to the top to going down to the south, it rotates almost through 90 degrees. Mars will do the exact same thing. And if you're using an alt-azimuth mount, it looks like the planet is rotating in your field of view. So don't think that there's something weird going on. It's just that type of mount is going to give you that sort of effect. Now, the other thing that I mentioned is there's something else that's going to happen as well. And I've got the standard disclaimer. There's going to be a little bit of reading ahead. I'm going to go back to that rotation period. Earth rotates every 24 hours. Now, Mars, just as Mars is tipped over at almost the same angle as the Earth, Mars also rotates in almost the exact same amount of time that the Earth does, but it takes Mars 24 hours and 37 minutes. So that means that Mars rotates more slowly than the Earth does. Now, why is that something you really need to take into account? And this is where the block of text is. So because Mars rotates more slowly than the Earth, at the same time the next night, after 37 minutes, you'll get the exact same view of Mars. And I'll show you that. Okay? So here, I'm going to go back to October the 13th at midnight. And you may recall that the last time around, as we went from midnight to 1 to 2 to 3, this thing moved in this direction because that's the direction in which Mars is actually rotating. Right? There's one pole. The other pole you can't see, but it's rotating this direction. So what happens if you just wait till the 14th and go out and look at Mars again at midnight? notice that this bar has moved in the opposite direction. You're going to have to wait another 37 minutes while Mars completes one of its rotations to get back to this view, which is the same view you had the night before. And in fact, if you, for every day you wait, so this is on the 14th, if you wait until the 15th and say, I'm going to go right to the 13th, well, 13th is fine. I looked at Mars. 14th is cloudy. I'm going to go to midnight on the 15th. On the 15th, you're going to have to wait 37 minutes plus another 37 minutes before you see the exact same view of Mars that you saw on the 13th. Now, back in 1988, when there was an opposition of Mars, I had no idea that this was an issue. So I had my telescope and I made a sketch on September the 28th, and it's a pretty crude sketch, but I'm not going to be anywhere near the artistic ability of a lot of people. But you can see there's an ice cap. There's a dark area, and here's a dark area with the long dark area sticking in there. And I thought, oh, that's great. And I don't know if I was either busy the next night or it was cloudy the next night. But the night after that, I went out again. Now, the seeing was better that night. But again, there's the ice cap. There's the dark thing. There's this thing. And I thought, well, oh, that's great. I got a better sketch of it. And if that's all I'm ever going to see of Mars, I'm going to put the telescope away. I'm not going to go and take a look at Mars anymore, because that clearly every night I go out, that's the only part of Mars I'm going to see. And it never even occurred to me to get up at, well, anyone who knows me knows I don't normally get up at 4 o'clock in the morning anyway, unless it's to make a quick trip to the bathroom or unless there's a really amazing comet. But it never even thought to me to get up 4 or 5 hours later and see if the view of Mars was different. And if I had, I would have kept on sketching different parts of Mars. Now, that type of sketch, you might think, oh my heavens, that must be a really big telescope. No. This was the telescope I was using, a 60mm refractor. Now, granted, it's one that's got a metal tube and glass lenses, as opposed to the ones you get nowadays, which are all plastic. And in fact, in terms of David's talk earlier, yes, it did come with an actual solar, it came with a solar projection system, but it also came with an eyepiece that actually had a solar thing on it. And it didn't even go in the end of the eyepiece. You simply screwed it on over the end and you looked through it. And I did that on numerous occasions when the sun was very low near the horizon and for no more than 5 seconds at a time, just to prove to myself that there were such things as sunspots. I realize now that I probably should take the thing and just throw it right in the garbage. But even with a small telescope like this, you can actually see a huge amount of detail on Mars if you have reasonably good seeing. And we have a few members. Mike Gatto posted this picture that he took a few days ago. I corrected it from the universal time that Roy posted into our time, which is 6 o'clock at 4:30 in the morning. Again, I would normally think to get up at 4:30 in the morning, but this is the sort of thing that you can get if you spend some time looking at Mars. And as Michael points out, he first did a pencil sketch of it to get the shading and everything correct, using relatively high magnification, and over a period, I think he said about an hour. And then after he had done that one, he then later added the coloring to it. But this is the sort of thing that you can see. Now, he was using a bigger telescope than mine, but bigger telescopes bring in their own problem. And so the last thing I want to talk about is filters. If you have a really big telescope, because Mars is so incredibly bright, you may find it dazzlingly bright. So one of the ways to fix that is to get a neutral density filter to put over your eyepiece, which will dim the imaging down. It dims everything equally, so the color rendition, everything stays more or less the same. But it does mean that if you have a really big telescope, you can actually look at it and not be dazzled too much by the brightness of what you're looking at. This is one option. So this neutral density filter just sort of screws into the end of your eyepiece, and they come in different levels of density. The other option you have, and I didn't bother taking a picture of it, is you can also use what's called an aperture stop, which is basically a covering that goes over the big end of your telescope with a smaller hole in it to block most of the light, so that you're not getting all the light from the telescope. That also works. In fact, the one that I have, one of the materials that's really good for making aperture stops, if you have a big Dobsonian like I do, is that that corrugated plastic stuff that for sale signs are made from. 2 sheets of white of plastic with a corrugated part in the side. Mine's actually cut from a John Buchanan election sign from the very last election he was in, because he'd already said he wasn't going to be running, and there were a few of them still sticking around. I said, I'm going to help grab one of those and turn it into an aperture stop, and I still have it to this day. The other thing is that for some people, color filters can also be really good at bringing out extra detail. The handbook recommends reds and yellows, but you can try other types of eyepieces or eyepiece filters. These generally just sort of, again, they just sort of screw in at the back of the eyepiece. And one of the advantages these tend to do as well is generally these will also act as a neutral density filter. So they'll block enough light as they let through just the particular wavelengths of light that they normally let through mostly, so that you'll actually get a dimmer view. So that seems to work out well. And often the reason for this is because Mars's atmosphere does tend to backscatter some blue. So you can get rid of that blue to see what's on the surface through it by using either reds or yellow filters. So I'm open to any questions if anybody has any. I think I probably do a stop share so I can see everything else.
Yeah. Bob Russell asked, you mentioned larger telescope aperture. Could you define larger?
I would say 20 centimeters or 8 inches if you're using the old system. Anything generally above that is going to might give you a problem. So if you've got a 16-inch telescope and you're looking at Mars, it's probably going to be bright enough that you're going to have trouble seeing some of the detail. And I said, all you have to do is just put something over the front of it, just a piece of cardboard with a small hole, with a hole in it, a smaller hole just to dim some of the light is all it takes. You don't need anything really fancy.
Okay. Is a 100mm refractor okay?
Oh, 100, yeah, that would be fine. I mean, mine's a 6-speed, and I've never had any problem with glare from looking at something like Mars. So 100 would be perfectly fine. But like I said, make sure you go out and observe as late into the morning as you can, or decide if you're going to observe on 4 or 5 days. If you get a clear night, go at midnight one night, go maybe at 10 o'clock p.m. the next night, go at 3 in the morning the next night, so you don't lose all your sleep in one session. And if you've got, and that will give you a good chance. For those of you who are on the Halifax Center's list, Roy did send out a little thing that has some calculations involved in it. The Observer's Handbook does have a sketch of Mars showing the darker areas and the lighter areas. It has north at the bottom, I believe, and it shows the latitude, the degrees of longitude along the bottom of it. And Roy showed a simple calculation that shows how you can take the current date or the date you're not observing and convert that to tell you which degree of longitude is going to be in the center of Mars's disk when you actually look at it. And once you know that, and you know that Mars rotates at almost the same rate as the Earth, you know it's going to shift by 15 degrees every hour you watch it. So if you watch it for 4 hours, just multiply 4 times 15, that'll tell you how many degrees further on that map of Mars is going to be the area that's due south.
Okay, any other questions for Pat?
Okay.
Well, thanks so much, Pat.
Oh, you're welcome.
Most interesting and nice explanations of things stuff I didn't know about, but then there's a lot I don't know about when it comes to planetary science, so that's wonderful. Last but not least, we're going to leave the realm of planets and go into constellations. And Paul Heath has a youth activity he'd like to explain to us involving the constellations. So take it away, Paul.
Yep. As many of you know, on my school bus, I have had this up in the front of the bus to demonstrate the basic constellation and some facts about the constellation. I just leave it up there and the kids get to read it and look at it. And I get on occasion, the students will actually say they went out and looked. So it's a positive thing. But it's a fairly simple thing to make, actually. I mean, you don't have to have it as fancy as this. I did it because it's more visible within the bus. But the name of the constellation and what it stands for, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and then it's an asterism, is the shape of the Big Dipper. So the pattern of the brightest stars is what the asterism is. So you identify the shape of the asterism on your paper. This is something that a student could do for a science project, like for an astronomy program or Cubs, or teachers could do to have in the classroom. Now I've laminated this so it's very durable. And then with the constellations, now it's sort of a weird shape because I had to fit it up on the mirror of my bus. that's the reason why it's that shape. You could make it square or round, whichever way you wanted to present it to the classroom or for a science project. But what you do is you cut out little stars, bright yellow stars. I think on a black background is the best. This is just black construction paper or black Bristol board. And I cut the stars to 5 sizes. So -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that's basically naked eye visible stars. I haven't gone into little fainter stars, but it allows me to show the horse and rider, Aster, Alcor, and Miser in the handle of the Big Dipper. So you cut out your stars based on the size. These are all second magnitude stars, so they're all pretty much the same. This is a little smaller, and then cut out little lines, tape them on or glue them on, and then you want to indicate different aspects like arcing to Arcturus, up to the North Star from the bowl. American and Dubai, you label the brighter stars and like M51. Different Messier objects that might be visible. There's all kinds of information you can put on it. But what it is very simple to do. Just the Bristol board, you use colored paper, cut the size, your stars to different sizes, and you can make your constellation posters. So you can do all of the circumpolar constellations. Here's the Draco and the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor, and with Polaris, the North Star, visible. And of course, you want the King and Queen on the circumpolar, so Cepheus. And it's a good indication if they're a smaller constellation to give some perspective. Here's the North Star, so give a perspective where it is in the night sky. And of course, the information, what the asterism looked like. And then, as most people see, Cassiopeia, the queen. Now, W in the winter for going to eat at Wendy's, and in the summertime, it looks like McDonald's. So you could position it as, and that's the thing you can do, especially with the Big Dipper. You can use it for times. This is the summer, fall, winter, and spring. So you can use these. Students can hold them up for demonstrations as to what time of night or what time of year, the position and how they look. You can set up so you've got your constellations. You can get the Big Dipper, and then of course the Pole Star, the North Star. You can fit it in the proper position in the sky. So you can add the constellation images together to do a map that people can stand and hold up and visualize in the night sky. This is a great way to do stories of the night sky by have one student hold each of the constellations, and you can tell the stories because you can see how they relate to each other, how the constellations relate to each other. So it's a very simple project, and you can pick your favorite constellations. Perseus for in the summertime, or you could go with the smaller ones. Here I've got the small Triangulum and Aries together in the night sky because they're close together. So you can do whichever groupings of the patterns of the constellations that you wish. So and it's a great way for students to learn the night sky, the patterns, because they get to recognize. I mean, the starfinders are great, but these are a lot bigger and a lot easier to recognize the patterns and how they associate with each other. So it's a fairly simple project. It's inexpensive. That's the good thing, except for the lamination. They charge $1.50 to laminate this, just one piece. So the lamination adds up. But if otherwise, the construction paper is fairly inexpensive. You can make 4 constellations off one piece of construction paper, and you can make 6 ID packs off one construction or off one Bristol board. So 4 constellations and 6 titles off a piece of Bristol board. So again, it's not that expensive. The hard part is cutting out the stars. It's time consuming, but once you've done that, you can make your constellations as fancy and as detailed as you want. You can, but you want to put the brightest stars, but it definitely allows you to see how they fit in the night sky, how the patterns join together. So it's a great project, can be used by students, can do it. Teachers can use it to present in the classroom, or scout leaders can have it as a project for the Cubs, or someone that wants to do something for a science fair. So it's fairly straightforward and lots of fun to make. You have a rest after a while, you get cross-eyed cutting out stars. But and they're, once they're laminated, these are over 10 years old now, and they're still pretty good shape. So you can do them, and if you drive a bus, put them up in the front and let kids know what's up there.
Great, thanks, Paul. Any questions for Paul before we close? Don't see any. So anyways, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed what we presented. Hope to see you next month. That would be October the 3rd at same time, same station, and it'll be up on our website as to how you can join our sessions. So thank you one and all, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.